but we're also getting a lot of Germany, Austria, France are coming in to visit Amsterdam as well. Like they're still coming in. So in some way, it's like a little bit inauthentic that this is still sort of happening because no one's talking about the tourism that's still coming in. So and this is what the Dutch are pretty pissed off about, is that the fact that you still have tourism coming in, yet you're locking down your own people, which makes no sense, and you're making them ostracized and making them shamed and blamed if they've made a choice. And we used to be allowed to have all three, which is the test, the QR code, or proof that you've had COVID. And now they've taken that, they're moving it to just the QR code, and the Dutch are up in arms over that because the Dutch culture themselves are all about freedom of choice. And when you start pressing on that, they're not going to take it lightly.
Ireland even has even 92%, I think, and they are saying they are also locking down. It's crazy. You have a 92. I thought that once you get to herd immunity, this COVID would be under control, but
Well, I mean, one of my clients over here literally has been testing constantly, and she has a CrossFit gym of all vaccinated, and she got hit with COVID by basically getting it from a vaccinated person. And she's a CrossFit athlete, and she was down for 10 days, and she was like, this is really bullshit. I own a studio. I own a training facility. You're saying this vaccination is going to help, but then here I am with all vaccinated members, so it's really inauthentic to make it seem like vaccinated people could just go in somewhere and not have to have the same regards as an unvaccinated person, because both could be spreaders. So it doesn't make sense how they're treating it. And I think that's the biggest obstacle that's happening in Holland, because the Dutch are very into the science.
Energy, Tyler, are you ready?
Thanks for the interruption.
Tyler, are you ready?
I'm ready, but just let Emma finish her point. She was just finishing her point.
Yeah, but the energy is getting negative again.
Thank you, Tyler,
That's
for the
okay.
Thank you, Tyler, for the respect of active listening. I really appreciate that. I was in a debate room with Prescott, and we actually did a debate, and I'm really grateful that I did it, because the active listening component is what made me communicate that statement across, because I am here in Netherlands, and in fact, this is what tech news around the world is, giving what's happening on the ground, and the early time zone is Europe. And this has been a real big thing this weekend. That's why I eloquently asked Pierre, what was the situation in Paris? Because Paris is only 2.5 hours away from Amsterdam. And the French are still traveling to come in to enjoy the streets and the canals during the Christmas holidays. And so the Germans are driving in and the Belgians are driving in. So I just think it's very difficult, as Messi just stated, to try and get this herd immunity if we still have movement. And I don't believe, quite frankly, in my opinion, we just have to still continue as we are. As Professor Asif said, we're going to live with it. And I think now the biggest challenge is, why are they forcing certain things on people that they've already noticed is not working effectively?
You bring up a good point. It's starting to make sane people wonder how much influence these pharmaceutical companies have. That you're right.
Correct.
Right. So they're starting to get. I'm super pro-vax, but
I respect that completely.
Yeah, but you're right. The amount, it's not adding up to 100%. And but that's something to keep an eye on. But I imagine.
Yeah, but the stats, honestly, Tyler, the stats. So recent articles I've read here from the science side say herd immunity is only happening beyond 90 or 95%. Number one. Number two is also they've seen that beyond 6 months, the amount of antibodies in the body go down. Exactly. So that's why you have to have another shot.
I get that.
So it's not a straightforward answer, but I understand the frustration. We're all frustrated. But again,
totally
to blame it on the government or a pharmaceutical company might be not the right way to do.
Yeah, no, I'm not blaming it on them. What I'm suggesting is, the suggestion that the pharmaceutical companies have too much influence in governments existed long before COVID. And the governments are behaving in a way that isn't completely consistent with the data, but in a very strong way. So that's what I'm saying. It's causing
Tyler,
people
that's
who are totally sane to start bringing back this question, like, wait a minute, what's driving this?
Tyler, that's a very
So,
interesting statement, because one of the facts that I have taken away from what you just stated is that the connection with the government and the pharmas. And for example, Europe has got a bit of a social system, correct? So when you start to navigate this, I have friends that work in the hospital that are Dutch, and they were very, very eloquent. And Florian will understand this as well, because I'm Latina. And I bring that up because you live in Thailand, Tyler, and you recognize the care and concern that most of the Thai people have for each other and for human beings and elders, etc. The challenge that's happening here, particularly in the Netherlands, is that there is not a lot of young that want to go and study medical, and the medical study is expensive. Right? Now, if you don't have a lot of young people that want to study medical and become doctors and staff these hospitals, then the system's going to crumble, because the hospitals are not understaffed because they're understaffed because of the weight of people coming in. Nay, they're understaffed because there's not enough staff of nurses and doctors that are working in the space anymore, because they don't want to go to that schooling anymore. They want to do digital nomad stuff in Thailand or Bali or Mexico or Portugal, because I know a handful of between 25 and 30-year-olds that have taken off already to Bali,
My 3 favorite
Portugal.
places, by the way.
Exactly. I know, exactly. But do you see what I'm saying? I mean, they're painting the picture in a narrative that I think is inauthentic. And I think that's what you're saying about, in my opinion, what I'm hearing you say is that
There's one other
the
point.
sane people are going mad because of it, because now it's going out of control.
Well, here we just start, like Sweden, according to the data, Sweden isn't having COVID right now, which thank God for that. I couldn't be happier about that, especially as an event organizer. So, however, even without COVID going up, it went down incredibly low and staying incredibly flat. And there's no risk to anybody. And I was at an event yesterday with 7,000 people all packed close together, like it was nothing, like it was like pre-COVID. It was kind of miraculous. I couldn't believe we were doing not a single, not, and I looked, and I watched them all walk in because I was one of the first 10 people in the room. There was not a single person who had a mask on out of 7,000. So yet, starting this December 1st, there's no new mask mandate. There's no new but there is a new vaccine mandate to enter any event of more than 100 people. I'm totally biased because I'm an event organizer and that impacts my events, and I'm not opposed to it. It is an interesting move, and anyway, so.
Just one thing quickly. I just listened. I heard on the news in the U.S., for example, they are struggling a little bit, even maintaining the nurse staff. That there was a doctor talking about how many people are resigning, and she said that like 20 to 30% of the nurses are, and they are just saying that they just can't cope with it anymore. It's going on for more than 2 years now, almost 2 years now. So I think they are just worried. It's not under control as much as we live with it like a flu or anything like that, because the system can actually collapse in some places when it picks up and goes down. If it was just under under some control like a flu, that was a much lesser number, it might be something we have to live with. So they are trying to balance it out. So that's part of the problem, I think.
Yeah, I'm just listening to all of what you guys are saying, and I think the main point is that we are finding that none of those measures are making sense, and it's very hard for intelligent people to follow all of those when we're not seeing them being in any way effective. So I think this is a little bit like every country makes a different decision. What happens in Germany is very different from what's happening in Netherlands, and I think we're just ending up feeling crazy because none of it is
But
helping.
Pretty spot on.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
but
say
I'm not
that.
sure.
Look
Yeah,
at the death
go
rate.
go ahead, Florian, please. Go ahead.
No, no. I'm just saying. I mean, I would just be careful with stating facts, Amy. Yeah, we have impressions, we have perceptions. Facts might be something very difficult
Oh
to
yeah,
state, and then
those were
I would be careful with saying none of the measure works, because there is, to a certain extent, measures work. Because for me, it's logical. We're going into winter again. People are inside again. We left the guard down over the summer, believing the vaccination will help. We recognize that 6 months later, the protection rate is going down. We see right now that that's the stats reported by the governments, that the people in hospital, of course, are rising. Most of them, 80-90%, are non-vaccinated people. Now the elderly, that's what it is. They're looking at how the different response rates are depending on which drug, which vaccination you have been administered to. They're looking at the third shot. I mean, this is a learning exercise. And also, there is not just one response of a government. Each kind of government does whatever they believe it's best. So, of course, that makes it extremely frustrating. That also makes it even further polarizing, saying, like you say, the tourists coming in, and that's the problem, because otherwise there wouldn't be a problem, which is just
well,
not true. This
Florian,
is
you made a
where the
valid
narrative is
statement.
different.
You made a
No,
valid
of
statement,
course.
but let me just correct one thing about what you said. You made a comment about saying, watch my facts. Let me just lean back into it for a second, Florian, because the fact of the matter is that I've worked in marketing first half of my career. Numbers and figures could be manipulated to the audience they're going to be presented to. So when you're making that statement, I'd like to err on the side of taking a sidestep for a moment and listening to what I was actually saying. What I'm actually saying is that people here could come and get a vaccine that aren't even from the country. And they're documenting these numbers because it's anonymous. So how could an anonymous number, an anonymous person, be made to be part of a populace for the statistics? And mind you, the Dutch are really hardcore with statistics and analytics. So everything I'm saying is coming from someone that I know that's Dutch that loves to look at numbers. The challenge that the Dutch have is that you cannot look at the numbers carefully if they have a city that gets 40 million people as tourism on a steady basis. Do you know what I'm saying? This is not Germany, correct? This is not Austria, correct? This is not Sweden, correct? But I'm speaking specifically about Netherlands, and I'm speaking specifically about the situation here. As a small business owner, I agree with Tyler. You need to assess your risk as a small or medium or large size business, but it still does not negate the fact that it's almost asinine, pardon my French, it's almost asinine to expect an intelligent person that has their own brain and their own cognitive thinking to be able to please everyone. It will be hard to do that. And quite frankly, similar to Stockholm, Netherlands did not lock down at all, with the exception of a certain period. And when we did lock down, it was consistent, but it was also, like you said, Florian, it was during a time where people weren't going to be really going outside when the weather's cold. And because COVID is specifically a virus that's very weak, and that's because a couple of my students are in the medical industry here, they actually said the COVID virus is very weak, which means if it's super hot or humid, the spread is going to be much, much less. When you have a northern part of Europe where the sun goes down, there's not vitamin D, and the weather's going to get cold, that's when that creepy virus is going to come up because it's cold. And if you have those events like Tyler was just talking about, the last event was recent and they'll change it on December 1st, I believe you said, that makes sense. But also you have a very young town of Amsterdam. Amsterdam is battling the young versus the older here. But the challenge is that I'm seeing is that the numbers that are coming in are not just Dutch. They're German, Belgian, Austrian, and French, which means everyone that's traveling by car, which means the numbers are not valid, which is why the Dutch are getting pissed, because we're getting dinged for the fact that our borders are open for tourism and people are coming in and there's no rhyme or reason who's the spreaders, because it could be either or. And it's not about blame or shaming of anyone because it's their choice. But the reality is, yes, in public places, you must wear a mask. Fine. But if you're outdoors, use nature. Breathing in and breath work is important to clear your lungs. There was a wonderful interview with Wim Hof, who is Dutch, who does a lot of work around breathing. And he had a really amazing podcast about him and about six folks, maybe more, that were actually injected with E. coli. And they actually, it was a really interesting experiment. And I highly recommend, if anyone doesn't know the Wim Hof method, I would highly recommend to look into it and listen to that podcast, because this is all backed by science and research. So before we start leaning into what people are saying is right, wrong, or facts, maybe we want to just take a side step back and just recognize I'm speaking from my truth, which is being in Netherlands and physically seeing this with my own eyes. Also being a yoga teacher, seeing this, how people treat not being mindfully their daily lives. That is what I start to look at. If we're more mindful in the way we live our lives and more aware of our surroundings and spatial awareness, we might actually have been able to manage this maybe just a teensy bit better. That is just my opinion from my experience being a yoga teacher for 31 years, where I'm close to people and teaching them breath work, alongside of being a consultant for half my career as well, where I travel on planes a lot. So I'm just saying this is something I think we really have to kind of, I agree with Maria, and Maria wants to say something. I agree with Maria that sometimes it makes the intelligent, critical thinking person make a question mark in their head that says, what is going on here?
But Amy, I think one thing we have to be careful is it has been said over and over, it is kind of a new virus. So even the scientists are learning as we go. So for example, Israel has done a lot of the vaccination. They are way ahead of everybody globally. So they seem to be getting data and then giving and then learning and then studying it so that they can give a feedback. So it does seem that things are changing, but really what it is they are learning as we go. They thought that first, vaccination might be a long term, but they just don't know. So because now vaccination is over 6 months old after the first vaccinated people, and Israel has a very good data with that. They did the study, and then they thought that the booster is a good idea because they could see the vaccinated people, the efficacy is dropping a little bit. So I think sometimes it's just that because it's a new thing, we are all learning and we are all getting frustrated with it. So it's just, let's be
No,
careful
for
with
sure.
it.
But I think what we're trying to say is that, like you can manipulate the numbers. For the first 6 months, there was no COVID in Poland because no one was tested. And so they were like, okay, well, nothing's going on. So it's like, this is, I guess, what we're trying to say. It's like, of course we don't know. But I think the challenge is that the governments cannot say, actually, you know what, guys, like, we are not sure what's the best outcome. So here we're going to run a life experiment and hopefully you can, tag along and help us out. Like, you cannot say that as a government, but I think this is the reality, and like you cannot instill insecurity in people and anxiety. And actually, this is kind of where they are right now with everything because they just don't know what's going to work and how to deal with it. And I think if you watch how the government behaves, you see that this is the case.
So we got to get the
I
air horn
think,
happening here.
oh,
Where's
sorry.
the audio effects? Just tradition here.
I think
Where?
I just quickly want to say that they do know what works, right? I mean, the vaccinated people, they don't die as the same number. They don't get hospitalized the same number. They do know. It's just that they learn
I
more
see.
and more as they
Half the
go.
countries
That's
have
all.
masks, half don't.
Yes, it
So,
does
so,
happen.
so do they know or do they not?
The people, I don't know, but I'm saying the scientists, the doctors, the
Right.
advice that they are
Right. So why
giving,
does
they are
half the
just
planet have masks and half don't if the scientists or the doctors know?
because I think they're learning the virus as they go. So, for example, when they didn't
Okay.
have the mask at the very beginning, in March, July, August, and September, when the New York, a lot of people were dying, the mitigations did help drop down the infection rate, the death rate, and others. And then the biggest drop rate was as soon as people start getting vaccination. So those types of facts do give them some kind of learning as they go. go. And like everybody said, different places have different reaction to it. Like, for example, everybody thought Africa was going to be decimated with the weaker healthcare system, with, all that, the bigger population. But it didn't affect it as much as everybody thought. And
Now
nobody
you're
knows
making the
yet.
point that they don't know.
Well,
Right, because
they actually have a thesis about Africa now, which I read about.
What are you arguing? That they understand it or they don't?
No,
no,
no, but
no,
they,
Tyler. I'm saying they know, they learn as they go. They don't know fully. It's a new virus. They admit themselves, but as they go, as they collect data, as the sick, the dying, they get more and more data. They are telling us what they are learning as they go. They don't fully know it because it's a new virus, but they do learn, and what works and what sometimes doesn't work as they go. That's all I'm saying. It's not black and white. It's somewhere in a gray because it's a very new virus.
Ken, you were saying?
I was going to say that I was just reading an article the other day on the situation in Africa, and I agree a lot with what Messi said, in that it's a new virus. There's a lot to do with it. But there's a thesis. Doesn't mean they have any proof yet. There's a thesis in Africa, which may make sense, that maybe because there's been a higher exposure to malaria in Africa, that malaria actually does something to prevent getting COVID. They're having more exposure to malaria because, again, it's a new virus. It's a thesis. They don't know. Okay. But I mean, it does surprise a lot of people, given the weaker health system there, that there hasn't been more of an issue in Africa. So they're trying to find a reason. On the mask, Tyler, I mean, that all over the world, that's a political issue more than a medical issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just say this, and this to me is one of the more obvious things.
So they're
If we had,
they're making. Would you then say that the vaccination passports are also a political issue?
yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that now is being debated about liberties that wasn't debated about polio and smallpox the same way. And the one thing that I feel really strongly about, I think it's almost like obvious, if we had as the same vaccination rates that we for this that we had with polio, that's how we eradicated polio. We probably would have this under a better control. But people have trouble understanding math. You could have a society with 75% vaccination, but 25% unvaccinated is still a very large percentage that allows the virus to stay out there and then to mutate. Okay, and so we eradicated polio because basically everybody got vaccinated. Okay, and we actually were even successful getting the whole world vaccinated, for polio. Where would we be with polio? Okay, if we had vaccination rates for polio that looked like the vaccination rates for COVID. I mean, people need to think about that, and that's I'm done.
Thank you.
There was no TikTok yet.
Okay, we did the air
Social
horn
media,
already.
social media is really a thing. Social media is a lot of things getting there. There's a very positive side because it democratizes access to information. But then, of course, there's all waves. And again, we are discussing that back and forth. And governments are also looking into the tech companies right now again. But this is all kind of interlinked, in terms of how to deal with a pandemic, a new disease.
I also think there's a lot of unfiltered information. It even goes on in conversations where people will be saying something. They'll be on a street saying a whole bunch of things, and in that monologue, maybe a whole bunch of things that are either very challengeable or demonstrably wrong. And we're sometimes too polite to interrupt them. And then, unfortunately, all the people listening accept those. It just gets people's minds worrying. So if there's going to be this much information flowing around the world, I think we need slightly stronger filters. And it's one of the things I like about some of the rooms I frequent is that if you make a statement, you try and build an argument on a false statement. The moment you make that statement, it's perfectly okay to stop, shout, talk over the person and say, no, justify that point or you're not allowed to build on it. And maybe a little bit more of that needs to go on because there's a lot of points that are built upon that are just demonstrably false at that point. And if you go on speaking for 3 minutes, having built on a whole bunch of points, each of which, many of which have got big holes in them, I think that's a problem. Anyway, just a thought.
And that brings us, Tyler, back to tech and tech news.
Okay,
Really,
thank you
because, again,
I
if you look
appreciate that.
at
Yeah.
whenever something happens in the world, there's a certain interest to foster information or to manipulate information in order to make it even more explosive, more difficult. more polarizing, and more anger around it.
Yes. I'm just the point of to me the point of the angle that we're touching on today is the European protests as it starts to ramp up in the Germanic parts of Europe, let's say. Thank God it's not coming into Sweden at the moment, which is a bit peculiar. We can all pontificate as to why that may or may not be. And it's I'm curious to see how the politics of the mandates themselves is just an interesting socio-political phenomena that I imagine people will study in the event that we have another pandemic, God forbid, in decades to come, that will look back and think about how what even though this is where Sweden was so interesting was, and I'm not defending it or supporting it or chastising it either, but they were one of the few places that considered how the policies would affect the population kind of mentally or emotionally, and how human nature might resist against them anyways, and that the more that you push, the more you might get a strong backlash. And just the nuance and the psychology of that is missing from, I don't sense that that's being considered to the same degree in many places, where it might be many places are making the best decisions they can based on the science. That's Thailand, for example. I live there. They're not concerned in the least about how, we're going to do what we think is right, and you're going to follow, and the people do follow. And in Thailand, they will follow it. In other parts of the world, they know they have populations who won't. And it creates a really interesting socio-political dynamic around the state mandating things. It's wild to watch. I'm just speaking from that perspective, really. So the top news story today, a 30-minute detour at the beginning here, is from the BBC, and Cheryl kindly pinned it to the top of the room, that Spotify removes the shuffle button from album pages for premium users so that tracks play in the order that artists intended. And Adele is receiving all of the credit for this, as she raised this to Spotify's attention. I'm surprised somebody hadn't brought this to their attention a very, very long time ago. No doubt they've heard this for a very long time. I used to think this myself all the time, having been involved in recording records. And the point is that artists, when they make albums, artists still today, even in the age of singles, and even in the age of streaming, which has gone a very far way to breaking the concept of an album. Like, the concept of an album is dying. The young audiences today don't really consume in the concept of albums. Artists, especially artists born before the 80s, grew up in an era of albums, and the concept of an album is incredibly near and dear to musicians who grew up with the concept of albums, because we fell in love with albums. We fell in love with, London Calling by The Clash, or, what have you. And it's a piece of work. It's Metallica's Black Album or the Beatles' White Album or what have you. And these were incredibly important, that was the piece of work. The work was the album, and the songs were, movements inside of the album. And now we've shifted into, post Spotify into, and we could actually more appropriately maybe blame Apple for doing the 99-cent per song download Apple Store system, that young consumers today don't even appreciate the concept of an album anymore. And that's causing young artists to no longer even consider but for the artists who do create their works in an album format, which Adele definitely does, and brilliantly so, it's a journey. She intentionally is crafting that into a journey that's meant to be listened to in its entirety. And I mean, the pieces stand on their own, but when people come to her page and they click She wants them to see albums, and when they click on that album, she wants that album to start at the first song and not at the fifth song, and then jump to the second song, and then heaven forbid go to the ninth song. It's I know this might seem trivial to the audience, but I can assure you it's not trivial to many artists who I've been in those studios myself when those albums were being made. And in fairness, I'll argue the other side. I have been in the studio with top name artists who put the album order together at the end. They record all the songs, and then they sit down and they debate, uh, over the album sequence and the order after the fact. Many artists do that. Many artists aren't super sensitive to this concept of an album, but some totally, absolutely are. And there's, heaven forbid, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Try and listen to that in shuffle mode. I mean, you can
I
technically do it.
absolutely, Tyler
You,
was going to also agree on that one. I was just waiting for you to say that about the Pink Floyd
I
as
mean,
well.
pretty much any Pink Floyd album, but particularly Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, the whole thing coordinates to the Wizard of Oz, for Christ's sakes. When you start on the third lion roar on the MGM Metro Lion, it's a piece of art that's meant to be consumed as such. And OK Computer, and you could go on and on and on and on and on. But just, I think it's a beautiful move that Spotify is willing to take the artist perspective on this. I think that the even more nuanced thing might be to let the artist choose on their own artist page. Do you want your album to play, in chronological mode, or do you want to give your fans the ability to have shuffle mode on your album page? Some don't care. Some very much do. So,
I mean, I was just gonna say, I totally agree. It's a double-edged sword, right? So, I mean, I had worked with Bon Jovi as part of their management team for about 12 years, and I've worked with Pink Floyd, I've worked with David Bowie, and you name it. And I remember having days meetings with the record companies just to cover the sequencing because the flow of the songs was that important. And of course, with which song we were going to promote and which song we were going to, market and put out there first, and where it lies on the track, the second track, third track of the album having a lot of importance. And so, I mean, there's so much thought that goes into it that maybe the average listener doesn't usually consider. So it is important. I think Spotify is doing a lot of great things lately, not just this. And I think this is a no-brainer. It should have been given an option that artists should choose if they want their music to, have that, to lock in their sequencing or not. But I got to also say this, Tyler, in today's music market, a lot of the albums, they're not putting the same marketing money. They're not putting the same promotions. They're not giving the same airtime to radio plays. And, they're not building an artist. U2 wouldn't have been U2 had it been a band in today's atmosphere, in 2021. It took them a few years to put that kind of um, money and emphasis and really a teamwork of people around it to work on every single song and marketing them to actually give them that color, that feeling, to give their music a chance for people to really get to understand it and follow them. Then it wouldn't have happened overnight. They don't do that anymore in today's market. So on the flip side of it, it's a double-edged sword because there's a lot of artists that honestly, they don't have good quality music for an album's worth.
well, here's another
And
point.
I think the record companies know this. That the record companies know this, and they're
Yeah.
just basically they're using them as fillers. So for them, it doesn't matter if it's on. People would not. A lot of these artists that are out today, people would not actually follow them and want to stick with them throughout the entire sequence of an album. They may have one song, maybe if they're lucky, two songs in an album that could be worth something, and that's all they care about. And that's why the whole singles market came in. And I think the first God, I'm blanking on his name. The first artist that actually became, God, what is his name? He sang "You Think I'm Crazy." What was his name? Which was the first real successful artist that hit it as a singles,
Is that
as an independent.
Nas Barkley?
Yes, yes, yes,
Oh,
yes. So that was like one of the first times that it became a success, and I think it was like maybe like 2 million singles within like the first day or something like that, and it became that actually pushed the singles market forward. So it's a double-edged sword. But I think also, I think I think Spotify. I listen to Spotify every day. I like the fact that some of the music and the playlist that I create has that shuffle mode, because the algorithms actually. The good thing about it is that the shuffle mode actually, if you're listening to different playlists, it could bring artists to you that you might have not known about, and you become a fan of them. So in some cases, it's worth it and it works. But as far as the album goes, I mean, yeah, it's a no-brainer. People should have the artist should have the choice to pick, if they want to have their sequences locked or not. Thanks.
There's quite a few songs by even very popular artists that I think of. Rocky Raccoon by the Beatles on the White Album. If somebody heard Rocky Raccoon by itself, you would think this is a stupid song. In the context of the White Album, it's totally brilliant. So, or Piggies by Lennon on the White Album, or I could go on for days. There's a whole bunch of interesting songs that only work in the context of the album and in their isolation or in a randomized context. And I do love the algorithm myself as well. I think you highlighted that very well. But if you're listening to a randomized order of songs and Piggies by on the White Album comes up, it would seem, what the hell is this song? This is absurd. It sounds like a cartoon song. So the next article, a totally big jump into Bitcoin from El Salvador. El Salvador plans to build a Bitcoin city. Initially funded by a $1 billion Bitcoin bond with $500 million to build mining infrastructure and $500 million to buy more Bitcoin.
The foothill of a volcano.
Correct, yeah, for geothermal energy, I imagine. El Salvador, the only country in which Bitcoin is legal tender, is going to build an entire city based on Bitcoin. And I assume this would put to rest the kind of hit pieces, articles that we read trying to drum up FUD, that it's not working in El Salvador, and El Salvador has regrets, and it's falling apart, and people hate it, and they're going to revolt and riot, and blah, 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 blah. Oh, really? You think are we to take those articles that we read, a month ago? Considering the city now is committing $1 billion to build a Bitcoin city, something tells me they're doubling down, and it doesn't seem like they're doubling down out of weakness.
Tyler?
Yes.
I literally had seen some videos this weekend do you remember I said my friend who's a lawyer from Costa Rica was Nubela's guest at the event? Like literally she was posting everyday videos and also a speech that he gave in Spanish. And I agree with you, Tyler. That event and how fast it was put together and how quickly people showed up to it, hard pressed to believe that they're super like anti-Bitcoin. But I would say that one also has to see the demographics of El Salvador and how large it is. It's in population, I think it's only 6 million plus. It's not a very big country. And most of the wealth is held by 20% of the country's population. So you'd have to look at it, like if you look at it from a different set of lenses, you could see that the people that may be holding the wealth are also realizing, maybe we need to start navigating into this space. And literally, on a sidebar note, we are in conversations because I'm going to be hosting an event in Mexico next month. And one of the things that's really fascinating is that there were only four women in that whole event. Only four. Number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Only 4 women in that whole event. And my friend and another woman, another lawyer, were 2 of those 4 women. So it's a little bit like kind of putting things in context as well, that we must also recognize who we're serving in these regions, but also culturally, as we said with the other topic, the culture of the region will also start to navigate how they're going to use what's presented for them, whether it's the metaverse, whether it's Meta, Facebook, whether it's another metaverse. Do you see what I'm saying, Tyler? They'll choose the technology or they'll choose those elements that work for their country.
Okay.
Tyler,
I have a couple of words.
but Tyler, before this will take a sentence, but people should need to read that article you just posted because they're talking about a U.S. dollar denominated bond. Okay, if in fact it's a U.S. dollar denominated bond and having done a phenomenal amount of transactions in bonds. I mean, it's when I started my career off. I like to see logistically how we're going to do this, because the way that bonds are issued, okay, and the way that bonds are paid, and you deal with the trustees and the depository and DTC, the depository transfer corporation, and everything else. They're not on the blockchain. Okay, they're on traditional technology. So I mean, so they're calling it like a Bitcoin bond with, in parenthesis, but it looks like
Tokenized,
it's
yeah.
a dollar. It's a dollar denominated bond, and basically they may get it done, but the money is going to be raised traditionally. The bond interest is going to be paid traditionally. The names, they're going to have CUSIP numbers, and everything's going to, apparently, if the way it's worded, it's probably going to be a very traditional bond. And it's not clear for 100%
Ken,
from the article. I just want to make that point.
Ken, take a look at Bitfinex, because that's actually where the article continues from a more technical perspective, because I believe who they're collaborating with is Bitfinex. And also, I know StrikeApp is also doing some work with random work down there, but maybe Bitfinex might be able to give you some sort of eyeball into how they're going to execute it, because also there are a number of projects which even my Clubhouse friends, Nick and Anu, I think it is, we're talking about Olympus DAO, the first ever decentralized reserve currency backed by DAI, which is a completely decentralized cryptocurrency. And that has been a really formidable project that has been also caught the eye of Financial Times and the eye of Goldman Sachs, because someone algorithmically, and technologically solved another really interesting situation around reserve currency. And bonds are in there too, Ken. So I would recommend taking a look at olympusdow.finance and looking at the structure of that, because that is a decentralized financial project that is also doing bonds and stuff. So take a look at that, because you have this expertise, and I would love to get your thoughts about it, because it's something
Could you
that
send me a link so I could?
absolutely, Ken. Because I really want to hear your thoughts, because a lot of your expertise around bonds, I'd be interested to see if they've pulled it off. That's what I'd like to know. So I'll send it to you, because I'd be very curious to know.
Can I add a little bit of clarity, Tyler? Not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah, you sound good.
Yes, you can.
Okay, great. Ken, so the way this is supposed to work is that there's a trust. That trust exists now, and that trust has two sides of it. One is the fiat side, which is going to issue these bonds. And that is a multi-$100 million fund. I think it started off around 150 million US. And so they issue bonds in US dollars, assuming that they can do that. And then on the other side, they buy Bitcoin, and they let that asset appreciate. And they try to keep the balance of these two funds somehow, they sell off Bitcoin as it appreciates and put it back into fiat. And they're going to return to the bondholders. They're promising to return some of the Bitcoin returns, assuming it continues to go up. So this is a very utopian dream. It's kind of game theory playing out. Whether this whole city thing works or not, it remains to be seen. But this Bucati is really a visionary, and it's fun for me to see a young president of a nation state thinking big and thinking about buying children's hospitals and things like this with this money.
Amy, I'm sorry.
Hey there.
I'm also reading that there's a lot of people in the country itself that they're protesting this, because they're saying there's going to be huge inflations now for them, and the cost of living is going to change.
Nada, well, that's why I said look at the GDP and the population of the region, because the average age is in the mid-20s. So, I mean, it's not a very old country, and it's not a very populated country either. And literally their GDP is, I think, about $3,300. So I'm not really clear how that would create, I'm not really clear how that makes the connection to how they're going to be fearing inflation when Nubele has actually been talking specifically with a lot of the people. But to Craig's point, I think what could be doing it, Nada, is the fact that 20% of the wealth is obviously held by people that are older. And maybe it is the older that are more skeptical because they're used to the traditional vehicles of instrument, as Ken was beginning to talk about bonds and etc. And that would make sense to me, because then it would be, who are the protesters? Are they your 20-somethings that are young, that are working at Bitcoin Beach and grateful for Bitcoin? Or are they the older generation that already has the money and is scared that they're going to lose money? Do you see what I'm saying? Because when you charge there, you can buy something. Sorry. When you charge there, because I saw the interface, you have a choice. The person who's a store operator or the business there, they have a choice to settle in Bitcoin or dollar. They have a choice. So there, I saw the transaction. I saw the chivo. I saw everything on these videos. If I go with my phone and I buy a cerveza, a beer, I will have a choice if I want to scan with Bitcoin or scan to fiat. So it's a bit like using a charge card on your phone, but you're going to be the store will be able to let the person choose if they want to use Bitcoin or if they want to use Bitcoin. They have a choice, and I think that's where I think it gets a little bit kind of tricky, because if they have a choice, then how is it going to make it inflationary? Because they have the choice.
I'm sure the whole world will be watching. The region's going to be watching, and for everyone that's holding the coins, it's nothing but good news for them.
Yeah, and also Mexico's already. I've already heard grumblings and conversations that are going on in Mexico. There's also conversations that have already happened in Costa Rica, and Guatemala and Nicaragua are already watching them. So the key is that, as I had mentioned a few months ago, and Tyler, this was the interesting thing regarding the Latin unicorns, right? Remember we talked about this? I said, what makes unicorns in Latin America? You said they have to get the fintech rails in place. And like what I see happening is though those fintech, those financial structures are getting in place now. And then I really see that more people are going to want to be over there bringing business to the region as well. But I do say that culturally they will align with what they see works. And Neda is right to say that the people that are probably going to be watching El Salvador the most are going to be their neighbors. And let me tell you, if El Salvador is able to do it, then I guarantee you we'll have a domino effect in Central America and South America for sure.
Okay, next article is from The Guardian. It says that Facebook's head of safety is quoted as saying, "We don't plan to finish the global rollout of end-to-end encryption." And from what I understand, he's talking about on Facebook Messenger and on Instagram chat, or on WhatsApp, across all of our he says across all of our messaging services until sometime in 2023. The move comes as child safety campaigners express concern that plans could shield abusers from detection. Yep, it does. And this is the difficulty of, do you want privacy or not? It's a tricky onion to cut. Is from the Washington Post, also about Facebook. Washington Post says they have sources and internal docs that show that Facebook's race-blind policies around hate speech left minorities more likely to see a derogatory and racist language on Facebook. Last year, researchers at Facebook showed executives an example, the kind of hate speech circulating on the social network. Okay. Okay, next one is that Apple's self-repair self-service repair, likely created to ward off regulatory pressure, may increase repairability of its own devices and spur an industry-wide change. Yes, Bloomberg phoning in the Captain, they win the Captain Obvious headline of the day award by connecting those amazingly close dots. That last week we read that Apple's going to do this self-service repair thing and provide manuals and make tools available for purchase so people can do their own repairs. And Bloomberg really putting those amazing amazing journalistic skills to work to conclude that this likely is created to ward off regulatory pressure. Well done, Bloomberg. You figured it out. You did it. Exactly right. The next one is from the Washington Post. To age in their own homes and avoid assisting living facilities, some seniors are embracing smart home tech, often at the cost of their privacy and independence. Wait a minute. Well, we could fix that. We just make it end-to-end encrypted. But you don't want end-to-end encrypted because Grandpa might be watching child porn. But do you want his privacy, or do you want his? Do you want privacy, or do you want encryption?
Oh, Tyler, your jokes.
Well, I'm just two headlines ago. They're trying to fearmonger on the point of end-to-end encryption because of the extreme case and a legitimate case. I'm not trying to minimize their point. But this is why I said you can't have it both ways. And the press is trying to attack tech on both sides. They're trying to say, that we don't have our privacy, and you're tapping into everything, and you're da 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 da. Okay, great, we'll make it encrypted. No, don't make it encrypted. Then the child porn will go great. Okay, well, what the hell do you want? And the journalists are having a field day writing, these snarky headlines on both sides. That your privacy is being stolen, and your grandparents, or your parents in their smart tech senior homes are having their privacy and independence jeopardized at the hands of the tech companies, and simultaneously aiding and abetting, child traffickers. Well, it's really neither's really the case. They're just doing these clickbait, dying days of journalism headlines that they must do to stay afloat. But yeah, I just like that we don't pick the order of these, as I've said many times, as Cheryl can confirm. And those two articles are, just barely, but they're both top headlines. So anyway, yeah, we could encrypt it. That would solve the privacy problem very quickly. Anyway, the next one is a company called Hi Mama. And kudos to them for spelling it like it sounds, HIMAMA. A certified B Corp selling daycare software in Canada and the US that improves parental communication. $70 million. And a profile of Manal al-Sharif, a technologist whose social media activism pressured Saudi Arabia to let women drive and who now informs people about digital rights. That sounds like a great article. Please pin that one, Cheryl. And
Hi, Mama?
No, the one after that.
Okay, great.
Manal al-Sharif, the woman with the hijab. And the next one is a company called 8Fig, which provides equity-free, flexible funding for e-commerce sellers by analyzing their growth, raises $50 million Series A. Spotify's Findaway acquisition will turn into an audiobook producer, distributor, and retailer while making it an all-encompassing audio app. Yes, as I and the Swedes have been telling you since the first episode of Tech News Around the World, Spotify is not a music company, it's an audio company, and they want to do all things audio. And why that was so interesting was because while Clubhouse was growing, to those of us who know Spotify, we said, Spotify is going to be very interested in what you're doing here at Clubhouse because this is audio and they want to do all things audio. And sure enough, they ended up making a move in audio. So the next one is a look at projects like the Vogueverse and companies like Pixel Vaults that are trying to build media franchises around their NFT collectibles. Yep, that's a super interesting use case of NFTs where I still think the Stoner Cats, as as trivial as it seems on one level, is actually one of the most brilliant moves in the NFT space we've seen yet, and it hasn't even really gotten fully underway. Where Ashton Kutcher and what's his partner in that? His girlfriend or wife? I forget Ashton's wife's name.
Debbie Moore?
No, post Demi Moore, co-host on the '70s show.
I forgot the name too. She was on the 70 shows together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they did
Mila Kunis.
Mila Kunis,
Yes.
thank you.
This idea was actually hers, Tyler. You know that, right?
I don't doubt it.
It was her idea.
Yeah. So the idea is make a cast of characters for an animated series, like not so different. Think South Park if you need a reference point, and then make those characters into NFTs that people can purchase and then use the funds to build the series, as an example. And before I forget, on the topic of El Salvador and Bitcoin City and all of that, I had a really fantastic lunch meeting on Saturday, and it was with one of the largest investors in India, from India. He had just arrived here in Stockholm, and I have good news. I'm going to be starting my monthly events in Bangalore in January with his support, and he's invested in most of the biggest unicorns in India. He works directly with the government, and he also is talking with them about their plans for how they think about crypto. And he expressed something what I thought was quite interesting, was he's pushing the idea that India should do a central bank digital currency backed by gold. India has a lot of gold, actually, and that it's trackable and backable to something other than another currency like the Tether or the stable coins. And that this would also allow other countries who want to combine their gold assets to this. It could be a multi-country central bank digital currency, essentially, where other countries could put together their gold reserves, increase the value.
Tyler?
Yes.
Are you aware that, and I know Ken would probably confirm this, there's about 8,200 tons of gold that the United States holds, and it also holds for other countries. So it's a very interesting desire that he has, right?
Yeah.
Because the United States, I mean, you could Google it. The United States, and I studied this when I was studying Bitcoin, that you understand the sound money and recognize who and where the gold is being held. And United States, even Netherlands, some of Netherlands gold is actually held by the United States. It's not held in Netherlands. They have some, but most of it's in the U.S. But U.S., I believe, has the highest number at 8,200. But Ken, maybe you might know that as off the top of your head, or at least
I have
probably.
no idea off the top of my head.
It's so funny, but you probably also know where it is. But 82 tons of gold is a lot. 8,200 tons of gold is a lot.
Well, the two places in the United States I know where we hold a lot of gold. One is obviously Fort Knox, and the other one is on Maiden Lane at the Federal Reserve. A lot
in
of
New
that
York City, right?
New York City, yeah. But I don't know. But I don't know how much they have there. I mean,
the U.S. does have a lot, though. The U.S. does hold a lot for a lot of countries, for sure, and their own.
We got on the topic because one of the headlines we read last week, which didn't get much attention, but I think should have, was the leader of India at the moment, Modi, suggesting that the Western democracies should collaborate on how they want to collectively think about crypto and Bitcoin or central bank digital currencies. And I think he's right. And I'm surprised he's the first to suggest that I'm aware of. And I think he's absolutely right that it's not something, that can be figured out independently. I mean, you can, but I don't know that that's the best approach, is that every country makes its own policy independently, because I think India is so big that he correctly understands that his decision is going to be influenced by how does Europe or America or other countries feel about it, so they could get together and make a collaborative consensus decision. Which I think is very smart. So anyway, the next article is 30 startups attained $10 billion valuations globally in 2021 so far, compared with 15 in 2020, double, and 5 in 2019. So we went from 5 to 15 to 30 companies new companies in those years. So we really went from 5 to 20 to 50 in terms of the number of companies worth 10 billion or more. And if that doesn't tell you that tech is gaining speed, I don't know what does. The next one is SVT Robotics, which develops software for simplifying robot deployment. Raises $25 million by Tiger Global. You are going to keep reading these articles. It's going to get easier and easier. There's going to be lots and lots and lots of investment into making robots easier to deploy, easier to operate, easier to set up. And it's only going to, if you've been following startup land for more than 5 years, they've got this, the investors and the entrepreneurs are licking their lips and game on. Just like the scooters carpeting your cities, you're going to have robots carpeting your businesses. That's the activity we're seeing right now from the investment side. And there's a very dependable trend. You get Tiger Global and SoftBank and Sequoia and everybody in Google investing in robots. 5 years ago, they were investing in micro-mobility scooters. And here we are today, 5 years later, and you're tripping all over them, all over the sidewalks. Similarly, you'll be tripping over robotic-armed robots inside of every business. When I say it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, this is a very predictable pattern of investors throwing in huge sums of money, running all. This is just how tech works, and you're seeing. So the prediction that we're going to have these single-armed robots all over instead of carpeting our sidewalks of our cities, they'll be inside of every mom and pop, mostly restaurants to start with, I assume. But
Tyler, sorry to interrupt, they just did the first Starbucks in the US.
Starbucks?
It was over the weekend. Yeah, they just did the first self-operated Starbucks, I think. It was in the news. I caught it in my feed. I'm surprised you haven't seen that. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll see it. It just happened, I think, like Saturday it came out or something. But it came over that they have the first unmanned Starbucks or something like that.
Yeah, I think we covered it in this room. I didn't know
Did
if it
you?
actually opened, but they're going
Yeah,
to do it.
I thought it did open, Ken. I'm not sure.
Okay,
I
then
thought
maybe
it
it
did
did.
open.
It's on Lexington Avenue. That's where they're planning it in Manhattan. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. Maybe it did. Maybe it did. I don't know. That's why I was asking.
See that the robot delivery, there was an article a week ago in Minneapolis that says 30 Starship robots now delivering food around South Dakota State University campus. And they're delivering Starbucks as well, and it's with the Starship robots. And if you don't know what we mean by the Starship robots, that's the company from Estonia who really deserves all the credit for pioneering this little transport robot with 6 little wheels, which has been blatantly copied by Amazon and Yandex out of Russia, which is Russia's main search engine. It's their biggest tech company, actually. And they both just blatantly copied it. And it's a cute, adorable little delivery robot. But yeah, I do remember now that you mention it, Ken, that one pilot location. Thank you for the reminder, May. So yeah, it's coming, and it's not going to be slow. Just like the scooters, you saw 1 or 2, and next thing you know, you're tripping all over them. It's going to be very similar with the robot
Tyler,
adoption.
what is the protection mechanism going to be for these robots? I'm having like a really eerily like thought about Squid Games right now, that like, the people this is going to take away some jobs for sure, but like I'm just thinking like, what if people like run over the robot or something? Do you know what I'm saying? Like that they
Well,
want to play
let's
like.
make sure we're talking about this because I think the thing we covered that I recalled, and it did open apparently.
It's cashless. It's cashless,
Cashless.
but
It was
not
cashless. I
still.
don't think it was
No.
robotic. It was cashless.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's
that's right.
yeah.
So
It's
it's like a
Amazon.
beaconless
Amazon.
technology, the beaconless
Sure.
technology where they go
Yeah.
through and you do
Not
it.
yet. Not yet. Still, they have staff there to give you the pickup.
Yeah, but it still goes back to the question, Tyler. Are we going to have like a real life Squid Games if these robots start going around the roads and people just don't like it and just want to like knock them over or run them over?
Well, this is the crazy thing is Squid Game is, and I loved that series, by the way.
That's why I said that.
Yeah, it paints a picture of either the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots become desperate, debt-ridden, debt-trapped individuals without much autonomy, and so they're forced to make this difficult decision. And the reality is, there is farmable land to go to with water that humans for most of human history until literally 5 seconds ago were farming and living in an Amish lifestyle, and it's only in the blink of an eye on the humanity's time scale that we've forgotten how to do that.
Yeah, Tyler, I agree with you. Tyler, is Asia the only place where you see this? Because I know you're partial to the Asia because you're over there. But what are your top 3 places where you see that this is viable? Because what you're describing is also in Latin America as well. And that's why I'm saying, like, when you describe it, I feel like it's very only that part of the world. But I believe there's other parts too. They're just not as popularized because people don't get, obviously it's cheaper to go to where you are in terms of just being able to buy and source and do like that. But there are other places too. They're just not as easy to get to or not as beachfront.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to have a private island or be beachfront. I mean, there's just a ridiculous amounts of land that people cram into cities. But if you turn on the light, the nighttime map of the world, where you see where the lights are and where the lights aren't, you'll realize that we are just crammed into these tiny little towns, and there's just an absurd amount of land everywhere that you can live off of without having, now we can live off it. And God bless Starlink, because that's a game changer in this conversation. Because it used to be one of the big frictions to going out and living on a farm was, what about power and internet? Well, those have been solved in the past 2 years, my friend.
And Tyler, to the Neuralink component, and I know Meher is probably going to be pouncing in soon. You also start to see that this is what I was talking about in decentralizing energy, right? The Energy Web project that I've been sort of super excited about for like months now. That Energy Web project is still moving forward fast and furious. And I think that's for me, in my opinion, I think it's a really positive thing to decentralize the grids, right? Because if you decentralize them, then you could share energy across them. So where one doesn't spend it, they don't have to get charged for it. They could pass that back into the grid and it could be used for someone else. And I think this is where it's going to really go to the person being able to manage their own usage, like meaning really be present to their own usage. And this is, in my experience, also what, for example, in Holland, you like to talk about the fact that the energy costs are going up. It's really interesting because the energy costs are going up in certain parts of the world, but in some places where they subsidize solar panels, as you said, those people may not see it as obvious because the solar panels actually are being used to bring in energy into some places. And I think that's where we're seeing people starting to touch on using other forms of energy and how that decentralization feel could actually turn out. Because then you literally could end up paying next to nothing for your electric if you're someone that's really cost contained and someone that just doesn't use all these appliances. But lo and behold, the most strongest appliance in the house, which we all know, because we talk about it ad nauseum when it comes to Bitcoin mining, is a computer. So, the computer does take up a lot of energy. When you do look at your bills, and if it's broken out, you'll start to see what does absorb a lot of the energy in your house.
Stuff is Sharif, 8fig, Spotify. Where are we at, Cheryl? The Robotics extended threat detection and response startup called Stellar Cyber raises $38 million. Brazil-based global payments network CloudWalk raises $150 million. Ultraleap, which develops ultrasound-based hand tracking technology, touchless interfaces for VR and XR headsets, raises $82 million from Tencent. Ultraleap develops ultrasound-based hand tracking tech. That's effing cool, y'all. We got to read that one. That's unbelievable. From my buddy Mike Butcher, it says, it was way back in 2017 that the company that became Ultraleap, now called Ultra Haptics, or previously called Ultra Haptics, demonstrated technology that pioneered ultrasound to replicate the sense of touch. The impressive Star Wars demonstration took the crowd by storm. It was quite the demo. They went on to raise $23 million. We've now raised $82 million, led by a combination from Tencent. Also participating were existing shareholder. So it's basically, and there's a company in Stockholm doing the same thing, which is haptics without touch, without physical touch. You're touching sound, basically. And for example, the example that I saw it's called mid-air haptics, where you go to McDonald's, and in Scandinavia, when you go to any fast food restaurant now, you order from a very large screen, a huge touch screen, and there's dozens of these huge touch screens in every fast food restaurant now. The problem is you're touching the screen with your finger, and then you're eating French fries later, and I think you can figure out the problem there. So they figured out a way to have underneath the screen tiny speakers that project a inaudible sound to your fingertips that you can feel. So you can feel the click of the screen without touching it. And that's obviously genius, because now you can eat your French fries without COVID, and that's lovely. But how you could apply this to the metaverse is also equally genius. That's for haptic feedback in VR and AR. What a brilliant concept.
Nicholas Johansson is on stage now. I just invited him up.
Okay, thank you. So, speaking of VR, the next one says Japan-based VR startup called Hiki raises $57 million, led by NTT Docomo, which you don't see that name much anymore since the 90s, to expand web-based virtual events platform. And then a startup called Kettle, a reinsurance startup that uses machine learning modeling on weather, satellite images, and other data sets to predict climate change risks, raises $25 million. Twitter's AI ethics researchers on getting public feedback about algorithm bias, why responsible AI is hard, why they think algorithms can be saved, and more. That's a good one by Casey Newton. And then a French-based startup called Oken, which helps medical researchers build and train AI models, raises $180 million. And here's a big one from MIT Tech Review, a very good publication, and that it says, investigation shows how Facebook and Google fund misinformation globally by paying millions of dollars in ad revenue to the operators of clickbait pages. Oh, you mean like the New York Times? Let's see who they mean. How Facebook and Google fund global misinformation. The tech giants are paying millions of dollars to the operators of clickbait pages, bankrolling the deterioration of information ecosystems around the world. Yeah, very true. Misinformation sells. And it's not really Google's fault. Google has an ad network, and people like to click on misinformation. And if you have eyeballs, you can make money. Is it really Google's place to say, oh, that website is, we should not accept, not send traffic to that, well, not allow them into our ad network? It's an interesting debate point here. So anyway, it says in 2015, 6 of 10 websites in Myanmar getting the most engagement on Facebook were from legitimate media, according to data from CrowdTangle. A year later, Facebook offered global access to instant articles, a program publishers could use to monetize their content. 1 year after that rollout, legitimate publishers accounted for only 2 of the top 10 publishers on Facebook in Myanmar. By 2018, they accounted for 0. All the engagement had instead gone to fake news and clickbait websites in a country where Facebook is synonymous with the internet. The low-grade content overwhelmed other information sources. It was during this rapid degradation of Myanmar's digital environment that a militant group of Rohingya, a predominantly Muslim ethnic minority, attacked and killed a dozen members of the security forces in August of 2017. As police and military began to crack down on the Rohingya and push out anti-Muslim propaganda, fake news articles capitalizing on the sentiment went viral. They claimed that Muslims were armed, that they were gathering in mobs 1,000 strong, and that they were around the corner coming to kill you. It's still not clear today whether the fake news came primarily from political actors or from financially motivated ones. Oh my God. But either way, the sheer volume of fake news and clickbait, I can tell you who it came from. It came from the main monk. Believe it or not, as crazy as it sounds, it was the Buddhist monk in Burma, call it Myanmar if you want, that was leading the charge against this. He was not financially motivated. He was motivated because there was a skirmish between the Rohingyas and the Buddhist Burmese, and the Buddhist group had the monks and the military, and the monks were really against the Muslim Rohingyas. It was not about, and it was misinformation, but of the most basic, general kind since Cain and Abel in the Bible. This is classic human, dark side stuff. It has very little to do with. I mean, do we think that the Rohingya Burmese issue wouldn't have happened without Facebook? Well, it's been happening since humanity began. So that might be your hint. Facebook started in 2007-ish. It came to that part of the world around 2014-ish. Did conflicts happen in that part of the world prior to 2014? Yeah, they did. So it might make it more efficient than, using paper. But by the way, living in that part of the world, as I do, people in Southeast Asia, the word gets around. It's nothing at all like living in a major metropolitan city. Everybody knows everybody, and everyone knows everything about everybody at all times. You can't fart in that city without the whole city knowing. Everybody's talking constantly to everybody. I realize you live in a city where you only talk to your friends on social media apps and you don't know your neighbors' names. I can assure you, Southeast Asia does not work that way. Everyone is related by blood to everyone within 20 miles. And they talk constantly about everything. So you don't need Facebook to start the coconut. We call it the coconut wire as a joke of like the internet. verbal. If you're a tourist and you go into a Southeast Asian city and you do something stupid, the whole city knows in 10 minutes without Facebook. So please get that through your head when you're trying to blame Facebook for what the the Buddhists and the conflict between the Buddhists and the Muslims, or the Rohingyas and the Burmese. I assure you, Facebook technically was the platform they were using because it's the goddamn internet in that part of the world, as the article just said. But I can assure you, if they would have found other ways to communicate without it. Anywho, but the
Well,
premise of
Tyler,
the premise yes, one second. The last thought I'll leave you with is the premise of the article raises a very interesting, debatable point, which is misinformation in many contexts is lucrative. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and not to mention, my God, BuzzFeed, and holy cow, the the Post. What was her name? Oh my goodness. Anyway, it's a really interesting point because they're tapping into. There's two ad networks basically. The main ad network is Google, and if you want to monetize your clickbait website, you run ads. And if you want to run ads, you go to Google and say, "Hey Google, I have a website. I want to run ads," and Google says, "Fine, no problem." They're not monitoring stringently the content of your website, and perhaps maybe they should. That's a really interesting debate. But now you've entered Google and Google's very intentionally avoided getting into the slippery slope business that the social media networks have found themselves wrapped up in. Because now you've got Facebook constantly being questioned and probed about should they, allow this or not allow that, and this speech and that speech. And Twitter was banning anyone who said Kyle Rittenhouse is innocent, because that's promoting violence. And it's like, really? What is this Twitter's role now, to silence anyone who says Kyle Rittenhouse is innocent? Are the jurors now allowed not to be on Twitter? So do you understand how badly how happy Google is to not be involved in that shitstorm of constantly deciding who's right and who's wrong? It's become an incredibly an incredibly difficult task for the social media networks to monitor. In the case of Facebook, 3.5 billion people and everything they say and do. Google has similar scale and understands they don't want to get into policing every website that they touch. So, anywho, was that messy? You want to jump in?
It was someone else, but I
I
will
think it's
jump in.
Aram.
Was that her? Yeah. But one thing I
yeah,
would
I
say
think,
is, Tyler, don't feel sorry for these businesses, right? That's the business model they chose, like anyone else. If we choose a business model, we either optimize it for that business model to work better, or the businesses suffer. That's how the world works, right? So I'm not so sure about defending that. That's Facebook. They collect data, disseminate data, and that's how they make money. And if they do want to avoid this type of stuff, they fix their business model. That's just my 5 cents.
Nana? Or was there was someone else?
No, it wasn't
yes,
Aram.
Tyler,
Oh,
I
Aram,
was,
sorry. Yeah,
yeah,
hey, Aram.
no problem, no worries. Sorry, I interrupted earlier. Because you were saying they will find some other way of communication. People in that region, already have very strong chain of communication. There's moms networks, there are
Yeah.
dads and grandpas, and there are street corners where
Yeah.
everybody get together and
Yep.
talk, and everybody knows everything, and
Yep.
there's no need for newspapers, Facebook,
Nope.
none of that. That's not the problem here. I think in the article they are targeting the aspect of clickbait
Mm-hmm.
articles,
Mm-hmm.
clickbait, and that is an issue for people who are maybe reading and getting the news from those articles instead of finding out the truth from somewhere else. So that could be a slight problem, but not the 100%. I mean, you can blame Facebook for that. I don't get it. It's as if you are trying to just find ways to find fault in Facebook, something. There are so many other ways to get the information around. How can Facebook be the only reason for all the, and these issues are going on for so long before Facebook? I mean, regional issues.
Those are the kind of boring goals. And now we get into
I
the
just
tweet.
pinned one on top. This was actually hidden in one of the arrows of the top news. You want to take a look at it? It
Go ahead.
says it's from Atlantic. The dangerous experiment on teen girls. I have not opened it. You want me to open it? Hold on.
Good article.
Yeah, can you read it? It just is on top
No,
now. It just
I'm going to be busy for the next 10 minutes. If somebody can share some articles.
oh okay. So I'll just read it then. Um, so the title is called "The Dangerous Experiment on Teen Girls." It's from the Atlantic. So apparently, the reporter. Can somebody read this, please? Okay,
Yeah,
social media gets
Cheryl, I can
blamed.
read it.
Oh, great. Aram, I
Okay.
love your voice. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. You're so sweet.
Yeah.
So the dangerous
I think
experiment
Cammy
on
is
teen
sleeping now.
girls. Yeah. So the preponderance of the evidence suggests that the social media is causing real damage to adolescents. About the author, well, skip that part. Social media gets blamed for many of America's ills, including the polarization of our politics and the erosion of truth itself, but proving that harms have occurred all of the society in hand. For easier, far easier to show is the damage to a specific class of people, adolescent girls, whose rates of depression, anxiety, and self-injury surged in the early 2010s as social media platform proliferated and expanded much more than for boys, as adolescence typically heightens girls' self consciousness about their changing body and amplifies insecurities about where they fit in their social network. Social media, particularly Instagram, which displaces others' form of interaction among teens, puts the size of their friend group on public display and subjects their physical appearance to the hand metrics of like and comment counts, takes the worst part of middle school and glossy women's magazines and intensifies them. One more question, though, is how much proof patterns regulators and legislators need before intervening in to protect vulnerable young people. If Americans do nothing until researchers can show beyond a reasonable doubt that Instagram and its owners, Facebook, which now call itself Meta, are hurting teen girls, these platforms might never be held accountable and the harm could continue indefinitely. The preponderance of the evidence now available is disturbing enough to warrant action. Facebook has dominated the social media world for nearly a decade and a half. Its flagship product, supplanted earlier platform and quickly became ubiquitous in schools and American lives more broadly. When it brought its emerging rival Instagram in 2012, Facebook didn't take a healthy platform and turn it toxic. Mark Zuckerberg's company actually made a few major changes in the first years of owning the photo sharing app, whose users have always skewed youngest and more female. The toxicity comes from the very nature of a platform that girls use in and to post photographs of themselves and await the public judgment of others. Sorry for the bad reading, Cheryl.
Thank you. Any parents here with young girls at home?
Yes. Any parents here with young girls that you're letting them harm themselves?
Without knowing, right?
And any negligent parents who let their kids harm themselves? And
It is.
are you blaming Instagram for your negligence?
Oh,
I mean,
come
it's
on, Tyler. Facebook's earlier version was what? Fishmash? It was all about college kids putting pictures and saying Mark Zuckerberg and
And
his
Coca-Cola was
friends
cocaine. Yeah, exactly right.
uh, and no, but I'm saying that you can't like absolute Facebook from it, because I think
Yeah,
that's
and you
what
can't
how it was,
yeah, Coca-Cola is
how
exactly
it
the
was.
same. Coca-Cola
No,
told
but
you what it really was. It's trying to sell you
no,
drugs.
no. No,
It's the
but
same
I'm
thing.
saying I'm saying that by saying negligent parents allowing that, but I'm saying even adult women,
Are you
how it
letting your
started
kids
in
drink
college.
Coke too?
Well, you know what? Kids are kids. You can't watch them, so I don't, and I'm not gonna speak onto that. I
You don't
don't
need to
even
watch
have
them
an
if you
idea.
raise them properly.
But I'm just saying, for example, the government took control of people from harming other people, for example, drinking and driving, because we as a human being drink alcohol, because even if we are told it's bad, we still drink. So because we can't stop everybody to stop that, what we started is we crack down on people who drink and drive. So there are many things we do as a society to actually mitigate harm. So I'm just saying that Facebook, when it started, the way it started was girls putting pictures and saying who's hot, who's not hot, and this and that. So it's not as if they didn't start and gain popularity from it, right? So yes, I agree with you that we have a responsibility, but we also have a responsibility from platforms from benefiting and other things, because you can't just stop everybody. This is what we talked about COVID. This is what we told even people who know that they could die, they still couldn't take the vaccination for one reason or another, or use mitigation. These things happen, so we really have to think broadly and not say that they have nothing to do with it. That's all.
I'm not saying they don't. I say they have. Here's what I'm saying: the most intelligent parents I know don't let their kids use social media or drink soda. And the stupidest parents I know, the most negligent parents I know, have no monitoring at all of their children's consumption of social media or sodas.
I
You think that's
agree.
But
you think that's a
also,
coincidence?
Tyler, that some people don't have the resources to do that. I know that my sister, for example, she's a single mom. She barely can make it. So when she goes to work, she leaves her kid sometimes in daycare. But then because she's a nurse, she works odd hours. Her friends pick her, my niece, up from school, and she stays there. And sometimes it's difficult to watch what they do. So she really tried to balance life with it. She's a single mom. What does she do? So not everyone has the resources to do 24/7 watching. So I would really try to be careful in generalizing everything.
See, there are apps that
I'm
can
not generalizing.
control
I'm
the
being very
timings
specific.
on the app and on the phone, and the phone can disconnect. You can only allow kids to watch 1 hour or however long, and after that the app disconnects or changes the password to the
There you
Wi-Fi.
go.
There's so many other ways to control the
Move to
watching.
China.
Uh,
It's also, I think it's
Hey,
also an
hey,
issue
Uncle
of
G will take care of it for you.
take the phone away. I mean,
No, no,
phone is
no.
not
Let the
essential
state
for
do it.
living.
China's
Oh
figured it
yeah.
out.
Mm.
Hi. You know what? I worked over 30 years on in an inpatient psychiatric hospital, and we had at one point the largest eating disorder unit in the country. And to a person, every young girl had a little folder of pictures taken from the fashion magazines that were the people they idolized. And this is a developmental point in an adolescent's life where they form their sense of self and they want to be this or that or the other thing. And the more we try to control this, the more they'll find ways around it. The point is that they're at a developmental point, and whatever the media is at that time, it was fashion magazines back a few decades ago. Now it's social media. They're just going to find a way. And you can't blame the social media. And if you clamp down and put controls on it, adolescents by nature will just find a way to be oppositional about it and find a way around it. Done.
So the solution is good parenting. I
I
know that's
used
Tyler,
to.
hard.
yeah.
I know people don't like to go to the gym, and I know they don't like to be good parents, but I think the solution might be a good parent. I know it sounds crazy.
When
Yeah, and I think I think
I
on
was
the
growing up, sorry Dave, I was growing up, I was not allowed to party. I was not, I mean, there were so many things that in our
Uh,
household were not acceptable at all. Doesn't matter what everyone else was doing, just because um, we were supposed to um, behave and act in a certain way, and certain things were, it wasn't like you cannot do it. It was explained to us, this is good, this is bad, and now I trust you to make the right decision, kind of thing. So things have been there since forever, and a lot of my friends were doing things at that time which I chose never to do, just because of my parents' trust. So there is a way to do these things. Social media, magazines, movies, so many things have been around all, you know, since forever. And the children, when they are growing up, their sense of self develops at a very young age based on their caretaker's relationship, their sense of acceptance, and when they receive affection and love, and they feel that they are valued enough. That kind of mindset starts very early, not later.
a great point. Do we
Can I
think?
make a comment, Tyler?
1 second, Shahin. I happily turn it over to you. A thought that's going through my mind is: do I think somebody like our beloved friend Chris, who has that his kids will be victim to social media, and I would wager very heavily they will not. That's the thought that goes through my mind. Go ahead, Shahin.
I was just going to say that these problems take a different, the problem changes when the scale of the problem increases. If two people have this problem, you can say, well, you dumbass don't have the problem, do this, do that. But when like 80% of the population has the problem, you can no longer do that. The problem shifts from why people do that to how you're going to change the entire culture, society. You could very well say that we have really rampant negligent parenting, and you may very well be correct. But now the problem shifts from how do we fix that? You know, you have to go upstream to fix these problems.
It's a
And
great
some
point.
of these are becoming really large now. So it is really difficult. Yeah, thank you.
I want to
it is
acknowledge.
it is
I just real
just quick.
quick, Dave. Real quick. I just want to acknowledge that's a brilliant point, Shahin.
Yeah, and like if I was to be asked what is the number one issue in kind of definitely America and Europe, it's the fatherless, i.e., kids growing up without a father figure. And I think Tyler, it's very pointed whenever I think to myself, do I stop my kids from consuming social media. Per like, I know that Coke isn't good for them to have, but then I also think that I'm tempered with the Aram's point of like, whenever I build trust with my kids, then it's what's done when I'm not there that I hope, because the trust relationship is there, that they will, their conscience. I mean, not to bring the God dimension into it, but like the Holy Spirit will convict them, because those that are older are Christians. So, but it's hard, and the person, I think it was Messi, mentioned that the single mother. I mean, I grew up in a single parent house, but per what Aaron talked about of extreme trust, I ended up regulating myself a heck of a lot more than my, you know, whatever family unit, mother and father in the house people. So it's complex, right? But I do take your challenge of like, it's the parents' responsibility on this. It's not the platforms.
Tyler, do you remember back in the day? I absolutely agree, by the way, Shane. It is, I've been saying it all along. It's the parents. And sorry about the background noise. Do you remember, taking it on a funny route for a second, do you remember back in the day there was an application, or maybe it still is, where I think it was for people to stop drunk dialing their ex-girlfriends or boyfriends, and they would have like a limit that before people would go out drinking with friends, they would put on this app and it would basically lock their phones for like 24 hours or 12 hours or something. So, I'm wondering if this is something that eventually, even though it's the responsibility of the parents, of course it is, but eventually maybe there's going to be some lock hours where parents who, like Messi said, if someone's parent is not available, not around, and can't always, monitor them, maybe just put hourly limits that they can lock, kind of similar to what they did with television stations back then.
Just
I'd like to add one more comment, if I may. Sorry, I don't know who I cut off. But
Carl, go ahead.
what I was going to say, that one of the first things I think parents learn is that you're not just parenting, you're also dealing with your kids' friends' parents. So when the kids' friends' parents don't do something, it becomes really difficult. So you almost have to when they say it takes a village, because it needs relatively consistent parenting by that enclave of kids' parents for it to be effective. You cannot unilaterally enforce something without causing other problems if other parents aren't doing the same thing.
Well,
That's really an issue.
well, Shaheen, I would kind of disagree there. Um, parents, well, children learn from example. So, for example, if my dad told me about alcohol and it's not being good for me, he never drank. He showed me that it's possible to not drink and live. His social circle, like his friends, if even if they are drinking and they are being served in the house when they are there, he would never drink. And for me, that's an example. So if I say, "Oh, my friend's dad let her do this," and he's like, "Have you ever seen me doing that?" And I'm like, "No," that's it, invalid. So you can't teach what you yourself are not practicing, and that's another difficult aspect of the equation.
Yes, I think that's a very valid example. But with in the subject at hand, if all parents are allowing kids to use their phones all odd hours, and yours is the only one that is prevented from doing that, and now that's an issue. You can still enforce it. You can still say, well, that's the rules in this household and that's the way it's going to be. And you can do that. And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to blame other kids' parents. I'm just saying that it becomes more difficult because now you're causing another pressure on the child. And that's the pressure of feeling their friends are allowed to do certain things that they're not. So now that is a different psychological thing. And if you're raising kids in a crazy place like Silicon Valley, where the pace of the life is not even suitable for grown-ups, let alone the kids, basically the message to the kids is that you must conform or it is your problem. You have some deficiency. And I just think that the pressure on these kids is just tremendous. And it's not just one parent's ability to do that. And of course, people do that, and more power to them. But in general, I see those two issues as the problem. One is that it is rampant, and the second one is that it isn't just you; it also includes the kids' friends' parents.
A lot of these parents don't have a baseline, going off what you were saying, Shaheen. They don't have a baseline to how to judge this situation. As in, Aaron, I loved your example, but your father's father had experiences with alcohol that he would have passed down that would have been either negative or positive, and his father's father, etc., etc. We're still at this stage where a hell of a lot of parents don't, they a lot of them didn't even grow up with a smartphone, definitely not social media. So when you look at your ability as a parent, and let's be honest, we're all kind of fucking winging this. When you try and figure out what the rules of the game should be and how to approach something, you quite often use your own examples to guide you in this. If you don't have those examples, then you're sort of trying to figure it out. And then there's the whole societal thing of well, it's empowering, as in giving access to social media. There's a large movement, especially if your child happens to be a minority, or they happen to be like in a certain community, like LGBTQ community and whatnot. Having access to all of those things is now classed as empowering, as in you have to. That's how they discover their group, and that's how they get support, and that's ironically that's also how it helps their mental health, because it gives them access to all of these things. So it can be really difficult as a parent if you're then saying, well, I know all your friends are doing this, and all of their parents that I know are letting them do this, but I'm going to arbitrarily say no because this goes against my fundamentals. And that's something that, parents should feel the right to do. But I agree with Shaheen. Then as a parent, you're being hit from all sides. You're being attacked from all sides. And it's very easy to do this if you're the kind of parent that has time to sit down and think about these things. But if you're juggling, if you're of a certain wage class in society, and you're juggling mortgages and in the US health bills and, dental and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, how much time have you got left to try and figure out if this thing that everybody's doing is bad or not?
That's
and
exactly right.
and
And my
and also is like in our house, for example, we were like five, my brothers and sisters, and we all don't follow everything, even though our parents were exactly the same to all of us. So we all turned out to do different things. Some of us who do follow strictly whether our parents were around or not. My sister, even younger than me, used to tell me, who cares, you could do whatever you want, and then the worst they can do is punish you. And she always got away with it. So it's just, I think we're different human beings, and the same thing doesn't work for everyone, I don't think.
So the danger is I really want to make this point, or at least the danger I see is I kind of agree with you, Tyler, in one sense of like, what will censoring Facebook do? But maybe for a different reason, because yes, it should be on the individual, but it doesn't really matter. If Facebook right now was forced to implement a 1 hour a day maximum on their end, so you could only have a 1 hour session a day, okay, that would do nothing, because everybody would just go over to Instagram. Okay, so Instagram implements it. Well, that would do nothing, because everybody would just go over to TikTok, or they'd just go over to Snapchat. Like, the point is, you can't just regulate one of these platforms. And then if all the platforms are locked down, well, that just opens the door for another startup for them to come out. So, unless you're going to put widespread limits on what a social network can and can't do, but even then you would have troubles, because okay, so they'd start turning to Twitter. So how much should Twitter be sort of restricted? Okay, and if they don't do that, feel okay, fine. Then start turning to things, that apps that aren't a social network but include that functionality, like art apps, for instance. A lot of apps that let you do like anime drawings and those kind of things, they actually have an inbuilt social network. They're not a social network though. So then the regulation breaks down, and it just wouldn't work at all. So that's never going to be a
Well,
thing. It's never going to be
what
a direction. But sorry, just quickly, I just want to finish. If anybody is genuinely worried about this, and they don't really understand the tech, and they don't know where to even start with this isn't an Apple fanboy statement, but just buy Apple. Buy yourself an Apple phone and your kids an Apple phone. Get the cheapest one possible. The parental restrictions on there are better than any other device. You don't have to install anything third party like Microsoft Family or Custodial or any of these other apps that work really, really well. Just go with Apple, because it's all built in. It's excellent. It's very, very granular, and it's the best protection that there is. But up until what stage when you switch those protections off is down to each different child, where you are, their mental health, and their neurodiversity as well. Like, you can take two 12-year-olds. One 12-year-old can handle the echo chamber of the internet perfectly fine, and another 12-year-old is going to get sucked in and you won't even know it.
So my point earlier was, Messi, I agree with you. People and kids from the same household always they do not turn out to be same people, especially the adolescent age. Yes, they do different things. My point was not about the young adolescent age. My point was about the formative years. The formative years of children are very young, like that start at a really young age. And at that young age, when they are like maybe 1 year old, 2 year old, they are not using social media the same way. That is the time of the life when the self identity is shaped and formed. And at that time, if like the parenting is done the right way, the identity that these young adolescent girls are struggling with comes up. That's where the root is of this issue is. And if your identity at that young age is not formed right, then no matter what you do later on in life, those struggling years, the teenage years, amplify these issues. So, like Dr. Francine was mentioning, it has nothing to do, or Shaheen was saying that there's extra pressure on the child. Absolutely not. There was no extra pressure. It was a form of strength. It was like you have that fallback wall to support you. You feel secured and safe. And that sense of safety and security comes from those young age, like very formative year related relationship and parenting lifestyle. It doesn't come, or it that shape does not come when you are 12-year-old. It starts way earlier.
But I'm just mentioning that, and please, I have absolutely no knowledge on this. I'm just saying my experience. In our family, we were raised, my mom being the strong one, and having the exact same rules to all of us from a very babies. So I'm saying we all are the same, and even we were brought up the same. We went the same school. We had the same neighbors, and we all had different, even in our adolescent, in our whatever. That's all I'm trying to say. We just don't absorb direction the same way. We don't develop the same way. We just are different. This is what human beings are being. So I'm just trying to say it's not just the parenting. It's just how we are brought up, and how some of us are, how curious we are. We have a very curious mind. We like to experiment from a very young age. Some of us, my brother, he was so isolated from a very early age. Doesn't like mixing with people. He always stayed from a very young age, and he still is. So I'm just saying, no matter what the parents do, these things happen. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I agree, and we cannot blame the apps for that. That's what I'm saying. It's a multi-pronged approach. Yes, we could, like Carl said, I absolutely love that point. Apple does have very amazing parental control. You can set that up. That phone would stop working on certain things after an hour, or there are so many ways to control the viewing of or consumption of social media, but it all depends and the self identity issues that the as adolescents are suffering from are really old. They were there in the print media as well, and apps are not the only. The way the apps are being blamed, that's what I'm saying. It can't be blamed on just the apps. There are so many other factors.
Right, but
It,
none of the controls will matter if the fundamental value of the person isn't properly established, which, as somebody said correctly earlier, it starts at a much earlier age. I would say it's the
Yeah, the
if
building
you
blocks, the
the
formative
building, yeah,
years, way early, way early.
and that it's unfortunate, it's very unfortunate, but that takes a lot of actual time that it's not really delegatable to any. It's like the parent-child relationship is so critically important to the development of the child that if it's not there, you can forget. There's no app, or you're going to be swimming upstream in a very long way. And the good news is, if you do manage to do it correctly, and as Carl correctly said, people are winging it, and that in itself, I would posit, is a bit of the unfortunate reality, which is perhaps one of the most important skills in life is being a good parent. And yet, where have I don't know that I've seen a class for that, or a master class advertisement on Facebook for or who's the celebrity. There's Dr. Oz, there's Dr. Ruth, the sex doctor. Who's the good?
Yeah,
I mean,
parenting.
we're talking about the
There,
most
there has never been a greater generational divide, ever, 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 between the current generation and the one that is parenting.
So my point is even if one does figure out how to, kind of on their own, sadly, it is an absolute tragedy that this is, that we are, people are winging it, in raising the next generation. It really should not be that way. I mean, my goodness, if there's something that we could focus on as humanity, it's how to enable parents to be the best possible parents, to raise the best possible kids. I would argue it would be difficult to find a more important thing to focus on. Um, and if somebody does manage to figure it out on their own, God bless them. I don't think they, generally, unless they get some really bad influence from somewhere, or some real, absent any particular strange occurrence, you probably could let the child go on Facebook and Instagram all day long, and they probably won't be as a fall prey or victim to
Yeah, impacted. They won't be
impacted.
impacted
Won't
with
be
the
as
sense
impacted
of
to the
self
same
is
degree,
right.
right? So I think the issue is, as much as Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the article for the Atlantic, he's an author of a very well discussed book on the same issue, and he makes great points in his book. But I think the issue is really in the 4 to 10-year-old, establish, the base of that relationship, so that by the time they get to 14, they have the moral compass to navigate, seeing models on Instagram, should they find themselves, being sensitive.
Tyler,
Yeah.
I think one of the problems is also not just with parenting, but it's also with the whole systemic problem of teachers and how much teachers are getting paid. Because, people who are essentially forming, young children's personalities and kind of overseeing children when they interact with each other, are people who are, one of the worst paid professions in like many countries, in my country for sure. And I mean, as far as I've seen in most countries, you have to get to like the level of a university professor to actually be paid decent money. So, when parents are not watching the kids, that job kind of falls to the teachers. And yet these people are so like underpaid.
It's not about someone watching the kids. It's about how the kid have a relationship with itself, with himself or herself, and to the point of lack of time. Well,
Hmm.
again, it's about choice. Instead of watching a TV game, you can spend the same time with your child.
Hmm.
And in response to the a point brought earlier about winging it, well, I grew up, my father did not grow up with computer and video games, and I played both profusely. But again, there was a rule. If my grades were affected, my video game was taken away. And if my grades were good and everything else was good, I was happy. I was not like retracting. I was not missing dinner. I was not, there was rules. If I was happy, healthy, and doing everything else right, I was allowed to play video games and be on my computer. Otherwise, no, it wasn't allowed.
Hmm.
So my father did not grow up with computer and video games, but he knew that if I'm not coming to the dinner table, what's wrong? She's on her video games. So that's it.
But you know, the question is how do you make others do the same thing? It's I think it's wonderful that there are existence proof of flawless parenting. And of course, that's also, as Messi mentioned, the combination of the parent and the child, and different behavior causes different reactions. But how do you do it at the social level? How do you do it when it's already too late? How do you do it when 30% of the kids have, in fact, not have had the right formative years that we wanted to ensure that they did? And that's where we are. So to me, the question is, how do you fix it now? And of course, understanding how we got here is very critical, and it's going to inform the solution. But how do we do? I mean, in a way, it feels like global warming. What do we do now, right?
Okay, so these issues, then people need therapy first of all. These children or whoever is suffering from identity issues or self image issues, they of course need a lot of therapy. These are not easy things to correct. It takes a lot of time. The bulimia, the those self-image related. Oh, that's very tough to treat. Even with a lot of therapy, these patients revert back anytime they're under stress, anytime something happens, they revert back to their old ways because the formative. Okay, so let's talk about solution. Having parental classes is a great idea. Having this sense of knowledge that if you are producing this new human being, you are completely responsible for the way that human being sees itself, because it's all about the mirroring neurons and the way it reflects back from the surrounding in early ages. So of course, a lot of teaching classes are needed for parents to know how to parent, and it's a huge responsibility. The people or kids or adolescents who are already suffering, they require a lot of therapy, and these apps are only maybe a little aspect or some part of it. Um, these are psychological issues, and they can't be treated just by the app itself.
Aram, or hold on. Jacob, you had your hand up. Jacob Abiola, would love to hear from you. I like your profile as a single dad. And I want to say, hey, Jacob, welcome. And I just wanted to say before I hand the mic to you, for example, I mentioned our friend Chris, and I would bet anything that Carl, Ken, Erwin, Shahin, that the gentlemen on this stage uh, don't, are not struggling with. I mean, everyone's struggling, but on this, I imagine each of them to be good parents, and I imagine as difficult as parenting can be, and there will always be struggles, that they will navigate this process very well. And so anyway, I just kind of, that's my impression. And I wanted to, and I imagine Jacob's the same, but I want to hear from Jacob. So Jacob, please welcome. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I imagine you had your hand raised around this issue of parenting.
Hi, Tyler. All protocol observe. Greetings to everybody. My name is B. Jacob from Ireland. Very interesting topic because this is my purpose. This is my why. Next generation, and that came about because of the situation I find myself when I took my son. When I step up and took my son at the age of 4 and raised him. Right now, he's 24 years old. He's an associate development scientist, master degree in biotechnology, and BSc in biochemistry. Unfortunately, there's no manual how to raise kids. But in my own case, I find myself in a situation whereby I have no choice. It's either I step up or become just like my forefathers or my father and run away and leave the child behind. The child is not asked to be brought into the universe. I did, and that due to my selfishness or my mistakes. But with that being said, I find my purpose in unconditional love that allow me to do with my kid what my parents were unable to do with me, to give and put them in a position where he would never, never be afraid uh, due to lack. So without, we have different ways of raising our kids, and there's no right way, there's no wrong way. But in my own case, I was just desperate for him to succeed. I knew I have to be great for him to be greater, and I know I have to juggle two balls, which I did. It was scary. I was afraid. I won't lie, but I did everything. I was strategic. I took it like a business. And when I came into this clubhouse, it gave me the app. I'm semi-retired, and I saw what was going on the app. I couldn't find most millennials or the youth. They don't have big followers. They are undermined. Nobody giving them about them. They don't come to on big stages. They don't. So I step up as well. I thought whatever I did for my son, I could do it for 1 million people, Millennium. And I opened a club called the Troubleshooters Club, run by the Millennium. They come in there, the corporate, I just facilitate. Whatever they want, I do. And briefly, we had a 19 years old from Czech yesterday, which we empowered. I bring in my big friends, my big followers, and big names to come and just show them the rope, how to try the right path. This path where we all in this room today have gone through. The lion's den, which we have been through and came out unscathed. That is just the way forward to show them what we have been through, how we take the path. I mean, their way will be different because this is 2001, right? So it's just the unconditional love. You have to ally yourself with them because their own thinking is quite different. Even right now, he's 24 years old. He has everything he needed in his life, but he still come to me for advice. Why? Because I have aligned myself with him and I was always on the same page with him. That's all I have to say for now, Tyler.
Hmm.
Thank
Jacob, you won the MVP for today. That was beautiful.
you. Wow. Thank you.
And Jacob, this is Netta. I was just looking at your Instagram page, and the love for your son and your accomplishments, his just clearly shows. So just bravo to you.
And I was just thinking about our friend Cal with his two kids. And if you know Cal, you know he has exemplary kids. And if you know Cal, you're not the least bit surprised. And I'm not the least bit surprised uh, with Jacob as well, who just joined us on stage. So I want to leave it there because we're 8 minutes over, and I don't think there's. I think we're at the top of the mountain with Jacob's point there. So we'll leave it hanging there, and we'll meet again in 6 hours. And I hope you can join us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler.
Grateful.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank
Grateful.
Thank you,
you.
Sharon.